Today is January 10th, 2025, and this is William Michael, the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. A very common question that I receive from parents is what courses should be chosen for younger children. And this is actually a very complicated question because first of all, I'll assume that we're talking about a homeschool student. And what's complicated about homeschooling is that parents have a great deal of freedom and can choose really to do anything that they want with respect to education, but depending on where the family lives, the requirements for homeschooling in their state will vary from one state to another. So the first thing that I would recommend when you're asking what courses you should choose for a child, the first thing you need to consider is the requirements of your state with respect to homeschooling. You need to make sure that you are actually registered as a homeschooling family in your state. And then you need to learn what the requirements are in your state so you can make sure that you're satisfying those requirements. Many homeschooling families like to complain about and resist state requirements, but my advice is that you not follow that foolish path, but instead show yourself ready and willing to be compliant to the law, which is a Christian duty, and satisfy the requirements. Because once you satisfy the requirements, and the requirements are not great, no matter what they are, once you satisfy the requirements of your state, you're free to do whatever you like. So the first thing that I would recommend is not, choose your religious courses or choose your spiritual study program or choose I wouldn't recommend that. What I would recommend first is to figure out what your state requirements are for homeschool studies and satisfy them. Check all the boxes, get all of that work done so that you can show it to the state and say, we're now done and we're now free to do whatever we want with the rest of our time as a homeschooling family. Once you then consider the second level of study, I would say, which is what to study once you're free from those compulsory education requirements, the temptation is to run into what I would call encyclopedic studies, where children are learning information, where they're gathering facts, reading stories, learning about characters, learning about events and stories, learning history, and so on. Encyclopedic learning is attractive, but it's not real learning. It's not really the goal of study. And you've got to be careful as a parent that you don't just settle for encyclopedic learning. It's actually not very valuable, especially in modern society where so much of information can be quickly searched up, as my kids would say, using Google or now ChatGPT. The ability to recall information is really not a valuable skill. So the second level of study, I would say, are those study skills which make our children capable of studying independently. Independent study skills. That's really what needs to be focused on in homeschooling. So it's things like learning to read, learning to write, learning to type, learning to sit still and work for an extended period of time, learning to follow instructions for the completion of lessons, learning to study and complete assessments successfully, learning to take responsibility for one's own studies, learning to follow a schedule, and so on. These are real study skills. And if children don't grow in these study skills, they will never be able to pursue real studies. So once the state requirements have been satisfied, my advice is to devote your attention as a parent to cultivating independent study skills in your children. And then once that's established, the collection of encyclopedic learning, the children can handle that by themselves because they already possess study skills. They can read, they can take notes, they can memorize, and so on. So you don't need to spend time teaching children encyclopedic information. If you teach them how to study, they can collect information for the rest of their lives. And so think about the old saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. The same is true with education. If you spoon feed your children information, encyclopedic learning, you may think it's impressive that your child becomes quote unquote smart and they have a lot of encyclopedic knowledge. But that's because you're spoon feeding it to them and they're not becoming independent. And so that can be very deceiving. We often admire smart kids who have lots of encyclopedic knowledge, but they really don't know how to study. They really don't possess independent study skills. And once they're separated from mommy or moved out of their home environment, they're like fish out of the water. They really don't know what to do and they struggle, if not fail completely. So don't be deceived by encyclopedic learning. The rise of encyclopedic learning was actually one of the errors that followed the Protestant Reformation and the Scientific Revolution. The Protestants turned away from the classical liberal arts in the 1500s and devoted themselves to the collection of encyclopedic information. You know the saying from Francis Bacon, knowledge is power, the idea that knowing the truth is really the way to become powerful as a human being. The problem is that much of what is called truth is found later to not be true. And so the idea that knowledge is power assumes that we have the ability to discern what true knowledge actually is. And students who are not trained in the liberal arts and in true philosophy and theology actually don't have the ability to discern what's true and false. And so the whole idea of going out and collecting information is really a deception that's not possible without discernment. We see this problem today with artificial intelligence. We can ask ChatGPT or any of these these AI tools questions, and they can instantly provide feedback and answers to those questions. But the AI is not capable of discerning whether its answers are actually true or not. It can't discern truth, it can't discern quality of answers, and so on. It simply retrieves information from other sources, but doesn't have the power to evaluate or judge that information. The same thing is true for people who gather encyclopedic information before they've developed independent study or research skills or really have cultivated knowledge of the liberal arts like reasoning and rhetoric and so on. So don't be deceived by encyclopedic learning. It may be impressive when kids are young, but it's like junk food. You're really kidding yourself thinking that your child is intelligent when he's simply retrieving and repeating information. So take care of state requirements, then give your attention to the development of independent study skills, and then ideally you'll have a child who by age 13 or so is capable of managing his own studies independently, and he'll be in perfect position to pursue the most rigorous possible high school curriculum to prepare for college and career. So that's really the goal. So try as hard as you can to avoid the temptation to immerse your kids in encyclopedic studies, history, literature, science, when by science we mean learning all kinds of facts about natural things. Don't waste time collecting information. Don't waste time on encyclopedic learning. Focus on independent study skills. And it's very difficult. Those independent study skills are difficult to cultivate. They can be boring. Children will resist them. They're not fun. They're not exciting. They have long-term future benefits. And parents have to be creative in finding ways to motivate children artificially to cultivate those skills by creating artificial rewards and punishments. And use those artificial rewards and punishments to motivate the kids during their childhood years to pursue things that they'll appreciate and benefit from when they're older. So satisfy the state requirements, pursue independent study skills, and then you can study whatever you like once that's done. And you'll have independent students able to take up those studies. So as far as choosing courses for children, that's what I would recommend, those 3 different levels. First, whatever is required by your state according to compulsory education laws. Second, whatever studies contribute to the development of independent study skills. And then lastly, when you've got an independent student who satisfies state requirements, you're free to study whatever you'd like. That's what I'd recommend.